What is an art style, and why do so many artists in the art community talk about it, want one, try and achieve one, and put so much time and effort into trying to develop one? Hi, hey, hello. If you're new here, my name is Rain. If you're not new here, welcome back. I really appreciate you stopping on by to my little corner of the internet. And in today's video, I want to discuss art style while I work on developing a piece that is mostly just a self-portrait, but trying to basically find a more effective way of utilizing my art style, a more effective rendering technique for myself, while discussing art style and why I think that there are complicated kind of issues surrounding art style, people wanting one, and all of the time people put into making videos, trying to offer advice into how to get one and saying that you need one. So if you feel like drawing alongside me or getting creative with me, I would love to hear about it down in the comments below. We're going to just be drawing in the background while I discuss this topic, and I would really appreciate it if you watch all the way through to the end so that you can see the finished piece and hear all of my thoughts through. But with that, let's just get into it. Also, if you're not new here, I don't know if I sound as sick as I feel. I sound sick in real life. I'm not sure if the mic just depicts how sick I am, but I'm going to try really hard to not make sick person sounds throughout the duration of this video. But that is just kind of an aside. I'll hopefully be better next week, but whatever. But I'm sorry in advance if I just don't sound great. But let's discuss what an art style is. An art style can be kind of broad and maybe a little bit more kind of general in terms of art styles that maybe were associated with large art movements. Think realism as a generalized art style, right? Baroque is my absolute favorite art style, ever. Art Nouveau, Classicism, Abstract Expressionism. If you don't know these terms, that is totally fine and completely okay. They're most strongly associated with art periods, and they're mostly associated with general art movements. So realism is probably the most long-lasting and popularized art style that just never dies, which is totally cool. We need realism in the world, of course, but realism is just kind of when you're trying to depict something as close and accurately to everyday life as physically possible. Then if you think something like Impressionism, that's something about the fleeting moment of life, right? The subjective experiences, and usually this art style is associated with very visible, broad, strong brush strokes and bold colors, right? You can really see that as a piece of art. It's not trying to capture you the way that realism is trying to mimic the real world, if that makes sense. It's basically trying to really just be a piece of art, where realism is trying to deceive you into believing it's not. Then Baroque, just because I love it, let's talk about it for a second, but it was a period of art where there was just a really big feature and focus artistically on dramatic, rich, bold colors, elaborate ornamentation, and really dramatic, dark, moody scenes. It's very gothic in feel to them, like a classic gothic feel, and I just love it. This was a predominantly European-focused art style that existed from early 17th to, I believe, mid to late 18th century, generally speaking, and it really was about exaggerated movements and pretty easy to interpret details, but the backgrounds and stuff in Baroque art was so dark, and the lighting was just really, really intense on the characters. Really, environment didn't matter as much when there was a character in scene. It was about their feelings, their facial expressions. Really harsh, godly lighting, which the god light is kind of when you have a really, really dark background or very loose, not super defined details in the background, and then the character just has this beam of light upon them that's just kind of highlighting them and them alone. It goes back to some religious art method. I didn't really study religious art, so I'm not as familiar with it. And some famous Baroque pieces generally include things like, I think probably the most popular one would be something like Caravaggio's The Slaying of Holofernes. I think it's Holofernes, might be Holofernes. It's not a piece I like. Artemisia Gentileschi did it 30 billion times better. I mean, Homeboy depicted the slaying of Holofernes as this girl like slicing through this dude's neck like it was like a piece of like room softened butter. Like, there's no emotion, there's no grit to it. I just don't like the way he draws women personally. Like, very just dainty and confused 25/7. But that's like a personal gripe with Caravaggio. But anyway, that's just to define my favorite art movement. But my art style is definitely not Baroque. If anything, it leans more pop art, where I kind of rely on very vibrant colors and kind of not realistic colors as well to emphasize emotion and to create movement and feeling in my pieces, even when the actual form itself doesn't really have any kind of movement to it. But that's kind of the generalized art style. Now, there's also art style in the sense of your personalized individual art style, and that comes, unfortunately for some, through self-discovery and through the continued creation of art. I believe that art style is not something that you force, it's something that kind of comes naturally as you begin to understand yourself as an artist and develop a approach to art that you truly like, right? Style is the consistent choices of how you express yourself as an artist. It's not just the aesthetics of your art, it is also the how that you execute, right? So, personal art styles are like when you look at an artist like Loish, their art style is very clearly defined, while there are other art styles. Well, there are other artists with very similar art styles or that you might mistake as Loish. Usually when you see a piece by Loish, you think that's Loish's work, right? Same thing with a lot of Lord Griss's work. Aliza's work, you usually look at it and you're like, yeah, that's theirs, right? It is the way that you create art, and it is the way that you consistently create art, usually. Now, I believe that artists can and should have other art styles if they're comfortable with it, but that does not mean that it is bad if you never have an art style, and it's definitely not bad if you are very consistent and your art style doesn't evolve that much once you find it. However, I don't think that an art style is actually necessary to be a good artist, and that it is a kind of a myth that you need to find it in the art community that does kind of worry me, and I want to kind of emphasize briefly. The long-standing myth that you need an art style or that you have to have an art style does concern me as an artist, because I also kind of fell into this idea that I would need to develop an art style eventually, and developing my art style has actually become a contentious issue with me in terms of developing myself for a actual career. Now that I'm kind of at a point where I can pursue a career in art and I have the skill set necessary to do so. Now, I love my art style. It's me, it's who I am. It is my representation of myself as an artist. And I don't think I would have chosen another path if I was fully informed, to be very, very clear. I think that if you are somebody who is going to develop an art style, it is going to happen naturally, whether you're looking for it or not, to be clear. However, I think that there is a shame around artists who don't really develop an art style and who do better just mimicking other art styles and kind of creating brand new imagery, but in the other style of, or in the style of other artists, right? And I think it's really important to note that those artists are just as valid as artists in their own right, even though they probably never will develop an art style. And that people who don't develop an art style are actually incredibly valuable to the industry, and probably one of the most easy to hire artists of all, because they're so adaptable and capable of being versatile in ways that artists who have a strong art style aren't necessarily capable of. This isn't to say that having an art style or not having an art style is bad. It's to say that artists are equally valuable regardless of what path they actually pursue artistically or what just naturally develops for them. Because just as much as we need artists who can adapt to multiple styles, we also need artists who have those defined art styles, who are capable of pushing the boundaries of our current expectations and challenging our beliefs, our ideas, and creating interesting and dynamic stuff in ways that people maybe haven't done before. So, equally so, they are equally valuable. Also, the artist with the defined art style is going to be the one who works the visual development job, which is the job that I really want. Or one of the jobs I really want. I want to do visual development, concept art, or storyboarding, or character design in terms of an actual art industry, video game, or animation job. But it is the people who have the defined art style who will be the visual development person. They are responsible for making sure the artists who are capable of working in multiple different styles are keeping up and remaining consistent with their art style, checking the work to make sure there's no inconsistencies that make it look like a bunch of different artists worked on the project. But in reality, these are big teams of people who all have different skill sets and are all working on the same project, trying to keep the same artistic voice. Animes like Demon Slayer, Death Note, I'm blanking, Spy Family, the Undead Murder Farce, right? Like, those are all made by a bunch of people. Shows like any Studio Ghibli film that you've watched, Your Name was a personal favorite of mine. Things like that, those have multiple people on them. Video games, think Elden Ring, that's not made by one person, obviously. It's made by loads of people, right? And so all of these are made by people who work in visual development, who keep the style very consistent, and a bunch of people who are capable of adapting to these different styles and actually creating the visuals in different sectors, right? You know, like the person who makes the trees for Elden Ring might be the same person who makes the rocks, or maybe there's someone completely different. All the character designs might be done by one person, but the armor is not necessarily actually modeled by that same person, you know. These people are all able to make a very cohesive game with a very cohesive style, even though they're all very different people who have very different lives. And so being adaptable to different skills is not a bad thing, and you don't need to actually find a style to be a successful artist. And I really want that myth to be kind of dispelled, because there's nothing wrong with never developing one. If you develop one and you find your artistic style, you find your artistic voice, and it's something that becomes very innate to you, that is wonderful. That's what's happened for me, and I have developed one, and we will talk about that in this video. However, if you just find that nothing is coming to you, you really like emulating different styles, you like bouncing between styles, you like going here and there, trying different mediums, doing different mediums, different styles per medium, there's nothing wrong with never actually finding that style and developing one yourself, because there is a room and a space for you to actually copy other styles and have a successful art career doing that. That's not a bad thing, as long as you can study it and really understand what makes that style, and you can apply it to your own ideas. That's okay. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? You know, as long as you are original in your ideas, you are pursuing the creation of your own imaginative ideas, or drawing characters in these styles that don't naturally exist in them, you know, new poses and stuff. If you're not copying the work directly from the screen to paper, or from the screenshot to your digital canvas, you having a direct copy of an actual art style is not a bad thing, you know? There are all of these books like how to draw in anime styles and stuff like that that people learn from, and you know, we don't call it plagiarism or art theft when people try and copy those anime styles, right? And that's because it's not art theft or art style theft, as long as you are applying it to original ideas. And art style theft isn't really actually that big of a deal for a lot of people in the art world. You know, as long as you don't directly advertise yourself as stealing somebody's art style, I don't think people really actually care all that much if you are heavily inspired by, or you are directly pursuing a career and studying the art style of those shows. You know, think Arcane. A lot of people were doing art in the style of Arcane when Arcane Season 2 came out and Arcane Season 1 came out. And that is because the style is incredibly attractive and people really, really like it. You know, it's like Into the Spider-Verse, where Arcane was almost seen and partially seen as an innovative show in its time. You know, Arcane actually kind of reframed and raised the bar for our expectations for animation and things like that. And that's because the style is so beautiful and the animation is also very wonderfully done. And now we don't call it style theft when people are trying to emulate and work in the style of Arcane and studying it for the sake of actually developing their own art skills. And we should also note the people at Fortiche are all different artists with different skill sets who are working to create a show in that one style, right? So my main point here is, if you don't develop an art style, as long as you are utilizing original ideas, original poses, you are designing things that actually push the boundaries of the style that you find yourself at home in, or the styles that you find yourself really drawn to emulating, that's okay, because the industry has room for people like you who are capable of emulating styles and seeing the value of the line weight and the coloring and all of that stuff. Additionally, there's this extra market, or this other market beyond the kind of traditional kind of ideas of what the art industry looks like, where having a not so unique art style is also highly beneficial, and those come in the forms of people who can apply an art style to a more coveted and desirable skill, or a more difficult skill to hone, and therefore they can bring this like art style that a lot of people already enjoy into a realm that is generally harder for other people to learn or master. So think VTuber models. I don't know a whole lot about VTubers, VTuber modeling. I just know that it's very difficult and it requires a lot of cutting and rigging. But being able to rig a model and to create art that is like pre-cut for riggers, it makes this process more streamlined and a lot easier for people. And that makes you a more desirable person to kind of like commission for art. People get commissioned for art all the time based on people being able to make you and your partner in the style of your favorite show, in The Simpsons, Gravity Falls, things like that, right? You know, so I'm not saying you need an art style, and I want that to be clear. I don't think that we should shame artists who really just haven't developed a total 100% art style, or whose art styles are heavily inspired by certain kind of more popularized art styles. You know, I don't think we should shame artists who have a more comic book-like style or things like that simply because their art style isn't super quote-unquote unique, you know? So all in all, if you haven't found an art style yet, or you find yourself just not developing one at all over time and you're starting to feel like it's never going to happen, that isn't necessarily a bad thing. You only really need to develop an art style and really like pursue one if it's something you really, really want. There's nothing wrong with having an art style that is kind of like a lot of other people's, you know, a classic anime art style and things like that. There is nothing wrong with that, and there's no kind of shame in that kind of approach. And I want that to be abundantly clear so that I can move on to the next topic of what my art style is like and how I developed it, and kind of, you know, how I got here in my life, right? Everyone and their grandparents probably has some sort of idea on how you acquire an art style, or this magical, mystical technique that came to them in the middle of the night through a dream that they're pretty sure was actually a foreign entity in the sky talking to them. And ultimately, depending on how many videos you watch, how many people you watch, the corner of the internet that you're in, the general art that you like to consume, you're going to hear a load of different ways that you can acquire an art style or start to hone one or develop one. And honestly, you're probably going to have to take tiny bits and pieces from all of them. What I say in this video might not necessarily be the key to developing an art style for you, and that's okay because we're all different and we all have different attractions. But I think we need to take a more analytical approach to this, but also a more forgiving approach at the same time. Let's start with forgiving because we as artists generally tend to be really hard on ourselves, and when you don't have an art style quite yet, and before you kind of reach this quote-unquote enlightenment stage that I'm going to maybe talk about a little bit, it can feel like you're drowning in other people's success, and it can get kind of overwhelming. Now, the reason we need to be forgiving while developing an art style is because we are consuming a lot of art all the time, everywhere, and now we run the risk of AI image generation getting in the way of our actual art kind of process and our developing kind of abilities, right? But that will be a little bit later. But right now, there's a lot of artists you love, you admire, you want to be like, you look at their art and you're like, I would give anything to create like that, right? They're your artistic idols. You love their work. But if you look at them all and you put them together, you're going to have one of two things happen. You realize that they're all actually pretty different and their styles aren't really that similar at the end of the day. Like, you can maybe kind of correlate one or two things here or there, but they kind of cover a wide range of different art styles and they all attract you and they're all pulling you different ways. Or you're going to find that they all look very, very similar or have a lot of similar elements just executed differently. Now, depending on these two paths, you're going to maybe uncover one of two things. If they're all very similar, you're going to figure out really quickly what it is that you actually like in art. Do they all use pastel colors? Do they all use thick lines? Do they have varying line weight? Do they use colored line art? Do they do line art at all? Is their style painterly? How do they draw eyes, eyelashes, noses? Are they environments? Do you like the backgrounds? Do you like the way that the lighting is executed? Think about it. Sit there and analyze the art that you love if they all have a very similar kind of quick look to them. What is it that you actually like? What is it that draws you in? And start practicing these individually. Don't try and copy their art directly. If you do, don't claim it as your own. Don't post it on the internet claiming that it is an original piece. If you want to post it and ask for critiques on your ability to emulate this artist that you love style, like quote tweet them or kind of like credit them, put their original piece, link their handles and stuff like that. Do all of the crediting, right? Practicing and referencing other people's art for the most part in the art community for the sake of learning, trying to emulate their style, isn't actually going to get you attacked or harassed. If it is, they're probably not the nicest fan base, to be honest, but generally, if you credit, you're respectful, you're nice, you're really making it clear that this is a learning experience and you're trying to figure out an element or a technique that you really like, generally the community is going to be very nice to you. And if they aren't, you're on a bad corner of the internet. You probably didn't get there on purpose, but a lot of the art community is very nice and they want to see each other grow. We want to see other artists flourish, succeed, develop, tell their stories because that's what makes us artists, right? Our ability to tell our unique life experiences, our stories that are innate to us that only we can truly have and tell in every single way that we've had them and can tell them, and bringing that to art and letting that inform the decisions that we make. That's one of the huge things that makes us an artist. So if you do want to post it, make sure that you are being very, very transparent, that you are practicing, you are learning, and this was a style study. Now, if you find that when you're trying to emulate these styles that it's just not clicking, you're not having a good time, you're getting frustrated, you're probably not going to end up developing a style that looks quite like it. If you're not enjoying the process, this isn't your art style. And that is something that I think is very important to note. If you're not enjoying the process of creating art, you have not found your art style yet. Because your art style is going to be the things that you enjoy doing, not necessarily the stuff that you like looking at. And I think that's kind of a contentious part or a difficult part to grasp initially when you're first learning about an art style and trying to develop one as as a young, or kind of not young, but as a beginner artist. We'll say beginner because you don't have to be young to be a beginner, right? But if you look at the art that I really, really like, I don't necessarily draw like that. And I have a huge swath of art of a wide variety of different styles and inspirations. The shows I like are drastically different from each other. The anime I like is very different from the TV that I like, things like that, right? And that's just me consuming a lot of different media from a lot of different styles and a lot of different life experiences. And these are all going to inform your style eventually, but it maybe isn't what's going to be the most easy thing to navigate right now. Now, if you were one of the people who has a lot of different artists and a lot of different art styles that are very different, start kind of trying to identify the first thing that when you see their art, you think of. What do you get immediately drawn to? And when you look away from a piece and you haven't thought about it for a while, it's not on your screen anymore. You think of the artist's name. What do you associate with them? What piece comes to mind? What aspect of their art do you think of first? Do you actually see an image, or do you see a color? Do you see a shape, a silhouette? Do you see a softness? Do you see a different value? What is it? Is it the storytelling itself, or is it actually a component of the technique? What is it that pulls you in? What do you notice? And then maybe start trying to emulate those broader kind of aspects. And once again, if you want to post to places, just say that you're doing style studies and figuring yourself out, and that's okay. But you're more likely to have a lot of different things that you like from a lot of different locations if you have a wide variety of artists that you really admire, right? So maybe you're looking at, off the top of my head, I can think of Lord Griss, Feeful, Loish, and Hayao Miyazaki, the Studio Ghibli owner, right? Maybe you really, really like the way that Loish colors her art, but you really, really like the way that Hayao Miyazaki stylizes the characters and does kind of simple hair shapes and eye shapes, right? So maybe you kind of try and simplify and do solid line art, but you do a really painterly coloring style on top of that. And maybe you really like the motifs and the plant themes of Lord Griss and Feeful, so you do a lot of plant and science inspired Studio Ghibli simplistic in terms of overall line art, but painterly pieces with fun kind of themes and frogs and band-aids and cute little icons on them like Lord Griss does, right? And maybe it's all of that you kind of find yourself within that. And maybe it's that path that will bring you to who you are as an artist and give you the most fun. But ultimately, your art style is going to develop from you having the most fun while creating art, and eventually you will find a groove and you will find a process that you enjoy, and the style will come naturally, in my opinion. I ultimately think that the best advice that you can give anybody who is trying to develop their art style is that it will come naturally with time, so long as you practice and you don't overthink the actual style component of art. The more that you create pieces, the more you repeat the same piece over and over again, the more your natural kind of desires will kind of come to you, right? And I think that you can see that a lot in artists who will draw the same piece every single year, right? I think that Drawing with Waffles, who is back on the internet, huge win. I'm so glad that she is back and she is doing a lot better after her medical crisis. I'm so stoked that one of my favorite creators is back on the internet, really like buzzing with joy, right? But anyway, I think that she would, prior to her 2, maybe 3-year hiatus for health reasons, she would draw Rapunzel every year. And I think it was the same composition-ish every single time, but you see the style develop year after year after year. And you kind of will see yourself evolve into who you want to be artistically as you acquire, one, more skills, but as you find yourself within the art making process. And I think that's something that we kind of take for granted when we're talking about style. You know, style seems like something that you hone through practice and through trying to study, but in my opinion, it will come naturally as you do what you love. And as long as you are authentic to yourself as an artist throughout these creative processes, it's very likely that it's going to just kind of happen for you, right? It's not something that you really need to look for. However, if you do want your style to come faster, I think what you can do, and in my opinion, what helped me realize my style faster, or maybe I started to notice it sooner, was doing a lot of studies. Now, usually, and in most things in life, it's quality over quantity. However, in art, it's not uncommon during the learning phase for it to be quantity over quality, right? 100 fast figure drawing sketches is going to progress and advance your skills a lot further than one single really, really detailed one. Because as you gain the muscle memory and the instinct and the habit of the repetitive motions, you will become more fluent and therefore more aware of yourself and skilled in the actual execution, right? Art is as much a technical skill as it is kind of a creative pursuit, if not more a technical skill than a creative pursuit. You can be the most creative person mentally and have really, really genius, brilliant, earth-shattering ideas. But if you don't develop your technical skills, it's going to take you a really long time to execute them the way that you want to and the way that you imagine them in your head. This is commonly one of the biggest roadblocks for beginner artists because you have this great idea, you think it's a great idea, you can picture it so vividly, but you don't know how to execute it. And as you develop more of those basic techniques and those initial skills as an artist, you will start to see yourself get better and better at taking what's in your head and putting it on paper. However, if you spend a lot of time on every single drawing, it'll take you a lot longer to actually acquire the muscle memory. And that's a complicated thing about art. You are communicating from your brain to your hand, and there is a natural movement that you will start to get used to over time. And art is also kind of a trial and error process for a lot of people. I don't believe that there is a surefire way to create art, and I believe that if you believe that there is a surefire singular way to create art, that you are not doing art probably for the right reasons, or you don't enjoy making art the way that you probably would benefit the most from. Because it is the people who push the boundaries of a medium and a style that usually are the ones that we have the greatest legacy for. Claude Monet is the father of Impressionism, and Impressionism was born from him going blind. Now, Claude Monet maybe didn't revolutionize the way that we utilize oil paints or the paints that he utilized. However, he revolutionized the way that we think about capturing images and the way that we approach putting brush to canvas and actually creating the feeling of a piece. And that wasn't because he was trying to push the boundaries of art. It was because his vision was going away and he was painting what he saw. To him, Impressionism was his realism. And that has left a lasting legacy of him being the father of an art movement that is an art style at the same time, right? It is people who simply create because they enjoy it and do what just comes naturally to them and are not trying to replicate and create a formula that generally are the people that we remember. If you approach art from if you do X, Y, and Z, you will get, I did not think through my variables. Oh no. X, Y, and Z will give you B. You're maybe going to be able to replicate the exact same piece every single time, but are you going to truly evolve as an artist, evolve creatively? And are you actually going to challenge people's expectations and notions of you as an artist, make people want to come back for more? Maybe not. I mean, at the same time, you might hate my art but love my personality and choose to stay because you like listening to me yap, even when I'm sick. And maybe you like my art but not my personality, and you will choose to leave despite liking the art because you can't stand to listen to me talk, regardless of if I'm sick or not. However, I don't believe that there is a surefire way to do any one thing, and that presenting art like that sets people up for kind of the feeling of failure. However, I don't think that if you find a formula and pursue it, that you are necessarily committing like art crimes. I just think that maybe you need to loosen up further along the way. For now, stick to your formula and what gets you where you feel you need to be, because you don't need to be anywhere, to be clear. There is no need in art that is actually a fact, right? You might feel like you need to have a certain skill, but you just need to be you. You just need to show up for yourself and keep creating, and the art will follow and come with time and practice. And that's one of the big feelings of imposter syndrome that we feel in the art community. We see all of these artists we admire, we look up to, we love, and we feel like we need to be as good as them. We need to have an audience like them. We need to get as many likes as them. But we don't need any of those things. We need to simply create because we love it. And the people who will also like our art will eventually find us. There might be keys to the algorithm or keys to succeeding at selling your art that can make you better at it or perhaps more profitable, but I think framing it as a need takes away the fact that we should be doing this because we love it and we enjoy it. And therefore, I don't think we should also frame art style in the same way. You don't need an art style. If you're going to develop one, it will come to you in time, and it might feel frustrating at first, but enjoy the beginning phases of art. It might feel frustrating now, but you're going to look back on these times with fondness when you're older and further along the line and further into your artistic development. I have little to no doubt that me in my 30s, I'm going to look back at the sketchbook and think, what was I thinking? This was not good. Really? What was I even doing? And that's fine. And you know what? Maybe when I'm 30, I will be doing stereotypical kawaii chibi art, and I will be living my best life doing it. I will be having the time of my life. It'll make me so happy. I will spend my entire life making Twitch emotes or something, and it will bring me pure unadulterated joy, and nobody can knock me off my high horse of happiness, okay? But right now I'm like, that sounds like a miserable thing to spend my time doing. That doesn't mean that's not what I'm going to want to be doing when I'm 30. And that doesn't mean that my art style now is any less valuable than my art style in the future. That I think is also important. I think that as we develop ourselves as artists, we also go through phases. Some people call it seasons, like seasonal depression, this is just a season in your life, a chapter, however you want to word it. That's cool. I call them phases, but we go through these stages or phases, seasons, whatever you want, where our art style is representative of our emotions and who we are now. And in a year, maybe even only 6 months, maybe even next month, your art style will also shift with you. In my opinion, the best way to approach an art style is as an extension of yourself and what brings you joy, what comes naturally for you. If thick lines comes naturally for you, then do your thick lines. The more time you spend being envious of other artists and the way they do line art, the more you're going to hold yourself back from actually doing what you enjoy doing. And I fall into this trap all the time. It's not you get into the mindset and you never fall back, right? There are pieces I look at from artists I love and I need to style study. I need to style study right now. I need to figure out just how they execute something so gorgeous. And I'll do that style study. And I will hate the entire process. I will be suffering. I will hate the colors. It is the worst time ever. And I come out of it and I'm like, that wasn't worth it. I learn a lot in those experiences, but I never want to do it again. And that's what reminds me that my style is my style, and it is who I am as an artist, right? Style studies are going to help you figure out just as much who you are as it is going to show you who you're not, right? I could try the Butch Hartman art style right now if I wanted to, and I know for a fact I'm not going to have a good time and I'm going to hate it. And that will be me reinforcing the idea that the Butch Hartman art style is not for me. That's not what I am. And I don't think that's a bad thing either. If you're doing a style study and you're really hating the experience, feel free to stop right there. You don't have to keep going, in my opinion. However, if you want to keep going, you are just going to continue to reinforce that this is just not the style for you. However, if you notice halfway through a style study that you're having a terrible time, you're not enjoying the process, start doing what you want to do in the style study. I think that is a really good way to figure out a little bit more about you in that moment. You pushed through a part where you hated it, but now what are you itching to do with this half-finished piece? If you're working on oil painting, is that desire to take a sponge to it, completely scrub it off, put a hole in the canvas and start sewing on it? Sure, do it. Have fun. Like, art is supposed to be about creative explorations and fun. Follow your instincts, follow your natural desires, and that will also help you figure out who you are and what you want to do. I don't know how else to articulate this, so to summarize this kind of like finding your style thing, what you feel compelled towards artistically is your artistic identity, whether you realize it right now or not. And if you follow it and you chase what makes you happy and excites you artistically, you will notice that you have a style, or you'll have people being able to recognize your art even when you don't feel like you have a consistent style, which is something that I notice a lot. I don't feel like I have a consistent art style. A lot of the time I really feel like my work is all over the place and not really balanced or harmonized, but I have motifs in my art or little things that I think tip off to people that my work is mine, that maybe other people aren't necessarily doing, even if their work looks kind of similar. Maybe it's something about my process, my layering. I don't know what it is all the time, but there are little things like the way that I always add cartilage piercings to my characters. Maybe it's the way that I always draw eye bags, the circles I put on the cheeks of my characters. Maybe it's the lines I tend to put on the noses, the random circles I put on the shoulders and the chest region. Maybe it's those little things that indicate to somebody that it is my art, even if the body, the form, and the line art is a little bit different this week than it was last week. And that's not a bad thing. I don't feel any shame or issue with my art ebbing and flowing with me. The same way I made a video a while back about how we really need to like combat this idea of bad art being a problem, because everybody's going to create more bad art than they're going to create good art, or at least they're going to think they create more bad art than they do good art, even if everybody else feels like their bad art is good, right? And that video is kind of old now, and I probably should revisit it because I have been having quote-unquote bad art recently, but I probably should revisit it. But chase your desires and chase your passions, and you'll find yourself, which sounds very mystical and kind of like let me read your card and I'll tell you your future kind of thing. But I think that once I stopped chasing my style and trying to find an art style, my style came to me. Once I stopped looking for it, I found it. Which is also just like when you lose something and you ask somebody else to like find it and it's like, oh, it was on the table the whole time. It's like, I checked there 10 times. What are you talking about? It just like popped out of the woodwork and was like, hi, I'm here. I'm gonna claim you now. Haha, right here, kid. Bam. Shabam. And I mean, at the same time, I think I developed my art style largely while I did an entire sketchbook, like the super thick Ohuhu marker sketchbooks, like before they were like their new cooler marker sketchbooks. The like, God, what are they? Like 175 pages? That sketchbook? The thick ones with the weirdly textured, they're square, I don't even know. I did like one of those and it was almost entirely exclusively Crollo and Phaeton fan art. I have not toured that sketchbook. I am sure that it is just a source of shame. I know I have a lot of style studies in there as well of artists who did Crollo and Phaeton fan art, and I don't even know if I could find the original artist, but like I think I found my style when I was just like in a Crollo Hunter x Hunter brain rot so feral that I would just do pages of fan art every night with Tombow brush markers, okay? Like, that's when my style came to me. It'll probably be at your lowest moment, because what's lower than 175 plus pages of Crollo fan art? But it happened, and now I'm here, right? So, who knows? Maybe you just need to hyper obsess over something for a lot of sketchbook pages, and it'll come. I don't know. I don't think any one person is an expert on this experience, and your path is going to be your path, and hopefully some of the things I've said, like many others on the internet and on YouTube, will help guide you in finding your artistic voice, and will help make this journey a little less lonely and frustrating for you. I spent a fair bit of time talking about artists I love and how I kind of found my art style partially through admiring them, but also partially from just giving up on finding an art style and letting it happen, right? So, out of curiosity, who are some of your favorite artists? Who do you take the most inspiration from? I really, really like looking for new artists. I want to do an updated art book tour because I hoard artist work on my walls and in books and comics and stuff all over my house. Like I'm obsessed. Like, it's a problem. Like, I don't have shelf space for this addiction, but I keep going. But so let me know down below, or I don't know, share their work with me somehow if you want to, like, tag me or add me to their, like, I don't know, do something. I love seeing new work, and I really like to know what inspires other people. Like, especially, like, if you really like my work or you feel like my work at all, what other work do you like? Especially work that's, like, completely different from mine. I'm very interested. But that's just me being nosy. So let's actually talk about how this was a style experiment for me, because we are getting to the part of the video where I'm starting to kind of push my own comfort pretty soon. And I didn't mention at the start of this video because I wanted to talk about style first in case people didn't want to hear me talk about me experimenting with my style, so that if they fell off the face of the earth, they got, like, the information they really wanted. But I'm going to talk about it a lot more in a minute. But basically, this is a self-portrait to an extent. As it stands right now, this is not a very accurate self-portrait. And that's because I do not have long hair anymore. And when I say long hair, if this much hair was on my head, this would be pretty gnarly hair. I have incredibly thick, very, very intense hair that defies the laws of the universe, right? And so any hair that goes kind of past my earlobes kind of starts to reach a point of being completely unmanageable. One, because I have a disability and washing my hair is very difficult and painful for me. And two, because it becomes so thick and oily that it's actually just difficult to manage because it starts to just kind of form into itself, right? If my hair makes sense to you, it's not an accurate depiction of my hair. It'll shoot up in like 10 different directions, and I can't explain it to you. My brother has the exact same issue, and, like, it's really funny. He still gets his hair cut professionally. I don't. But every time we go to get our hair cut, people are like, where is the hair coming from? And it's like, I don't know. They're like, I cut off a chunk of hair and it's literally attached back to your head. It's like, yeah, it's like Tomy, Junji Ito's Tomy. Like, the hair, you cut it off and it just comes right back. So I wanted to experiment with trying to think of the negative space afterwards. So I drew an old hairstyle of mine. My hair used to be a lot puffier and a lot longer, and it used to be kind of a lot more wild on the sides. At this point, I basically keep my hair only long on the top and short on the sides and in the back, and my hair very quickly will start to become a mullet. And it's a problem, okay? At this point, I almost need to embrace a mullet, but I don't want to. It's an issue. My hair is out to just humiliate me 24/7, but basically, I wanted to experiment with negative space after the fact. I didn't want to care about or worry about maintaining the silhouette I wanted while rendering the actual hair, right? I wanted to think about the shape of the hair in the moment and render it how I wanted to, and then cut away the actual background after the fact and see if I enjoyed that process more, and kind of think about those shapes later, not in the initial sketch. This is largely because kind of some aspects of my artistic approach are kind of more painterly in nature, and maybe at least a little bit more painterly than a typical marker illustration would be, because I mix paint pens and alcohol markers together to achieve my desired effect, right? And so I wanted to think about art a little bit more from a painting standpoint, where nothing is permanent and everything can be erased at any point if I truly wanted, which sounds counterintuitive with paint, but really at the end of the day, if you're painting, you can just cover it up. Just paint over it in white and start over, right? which you can do with alcohol markers. It's just not the same medium, right? You have to paint over alcohol markers. You can't alcohol marker over alcohol markers. So there's a little bit more of a kind of impermanence to painting that I wanted to play with. So I really wanted to kind of carve my own hair out of a past version of my hairstyle before I really started to figure out what worked for my kind of maintenance capabilities with my health and everything. And I wanted to just see how it felt and if I enjoyed this process of kind of just taking away from my own rendered piece and seeing how I handled treating my work as impermanent in this way. And I think that it was a very kind of like cathartic and interesting experiment for me because I know that I can cover up my own work at any time. I do it. And I cover up my mistakes pretty well. I'm pretty good at like hiding and covering up errors that I make in my piece or fixing mistakes. And my trust the process is very kind of like actually well done. Like, I swear it starts ugly, but it'll get good. I swear it. I'm really good at pulling back a really nasty, ugly piece most of the time. But I very rarely actually think about that in terms of just an already not great or not fully satisfactory sketch. I don't really think about my sketch as something that I can change after I commit to it. And that's why I really wanted to make a sketch I was okay with but not in love with, and then go from there. Really wanted to go through the process of saying, I'm not in love with this sketch. It's not the perfect one for me. It's not accurate to how I look anymore. And then go through the process of reforging it to look like me through the artistic process and seeing if that could kind of reframe my own perception of my rendering approach. And I think it really actually worked to achieve what I wanted to achieve, which was realizing that my art isn't final and that I can continue to make changes and develop it beyond the guidelines that I set for myself, which is something that I think is my biggest issue. My sketches are very lively, however, they very rarely account for the actual planes that I need anymore. Now that I don't have a very strong line art approach until after I've already put down color, I think that it has taken away some of my actual thought process to refining my art in a way that is actually kind of necessary. And so having this process where I just pushed myself to make a portrait of basically me like maybe 3 years ago and then just cut the hair out was kind of also very cathartic. It felt like those people who do show their face on the internet and do those videos of like hair holds memories and then they're cutting off their long hair or they like change its color. It kind of felt like doing a video like that for me, right? This process of me really just kind of like allowing myself to reforge my own illustration of myself was very kind of healing and enjoyable. And I had a really good time, even though the hair is still too practical and is defying the laws of physics a little bit too much for my usual kind of hair and maybe a little less mullety at the end of the day, but I didn't have a reference pulled up because my phone is my camera, which is why you can see the tripod is standing on. I'm sorry about that. I always forget to make sure it's out of frame. And I've been sick since like Saturday, I think, so I'm out of it. I was really out of it making this too, which is why I never actually went back in and fixed up the hyper pop colors, the pizzazz to the piece the way I needed to, which I might go back and do. But I found this very comforting and very enjoyable. And if I were to do it again, which I plan to eventually, and I really want to revisit my self-portraits. Self-portraits were a huge thing that I used to do a lot more of. And I think that was also another way that I really discovered my style because as I drew more and more of myself, I really started to figure out what I liked to make because I was a subject matter that I couldn't humiliate or be ashamed of, right? Like, I could only make myself look so bad in my own opinion that I was the perfect model to have complete confidence over the artistic process and not caring about the outcome. because no one knows what I look like anyway. And that's kind of a beneficial part of being kind of faceless on the internet. And I'm faceless for safety reasons because of bad experiences in my childhood, but it still gives me the ability to kind of not care when doing a self-portrait and allowing myself to really be kind of free with my own creative expression of myself. And that also really was something that helped me develop and define my art style when I was beginning and starting to figure it out. Now, because I like roasting my own drawings of me, because I'm always hotter in these than I actually am, my glasses are a little bit more circular and my nose is jank. One thing you might notice in my art if you stick around on my channel for longer is when I do kind of like tilted head back views of the face, the nostrils are crooked, and that's because my nostrils are incredibly crooked. My nose itself is straight, but my nostrils aren't, and I don't know why. I don't know what hit me as a kid. Actually, wait a minute. I fell off a horse once, and I got my face smashed into gravel, but my nose is fine from the outside. Well, I guess my nostrils are on the outside, but like my nostrils are wrong, guys, okay? And I often use myself as my own art references, and so like when I tilt my head back, I will just draw these jank nostrils, and then I'm like, people are gonna think I'm AI. Like, they're so wrong, and it's just my face. That, and then my nose, I think, has a bit more of a curve to it. It's hard to tell. I don't really see myself from the side very often. I just, like, don't take side profiles. I generally give people either a really curved nose, a more birdie nose. Birdie is the wrong way to describe, but, like, they have, like, the drop down to them, because I think those are super cute. And then, like, really sloped pointy noses. I kind of just shift between them, and I'm never accurate, but that's fine. Another issue is my freckles are a little bit more of a softer but darker brown, and these are a little bit more vibrant and fun. But I think that the colorful freckles actually suit my style really well, and so I don't really hold that kind of as a slight in any way, but yeah. Also, I think my jaw's a little bit droopier. I'm just not as sharp and defined, guys, okay? I'm a small, not well-fed goblin, okay? Like, nothing about me is sharp and defined. It's just not happening, but I very much think that this is probably one of my more accurate self-portraits that I've done in a while. It definitely catches the not happy vibe, even though it's super colorful and vibrant. Like, the character itself, the character is a self-portrait, bro. You need to chill out. The portrait itself doesn't give super happy or overjoyed energy, which I think is a little bit more indicative of myself. I feel like a lot of my self-portraits, I usually draw myself smiling, and I don't really smile all that much, and so, I feel like this one kind of catches my more natural state of being a little bit better, which is nice. But, of course, as always, the super glowy highlights were necessary. I can't live without them. They're literally necessary for my survival. I will die if my art does not glow and cannot be seen from outer space. However, this video was mostly supposed to be about finding an art style and generally why I don't why I don't really love the rush to acquire one, and why I think we need to just focus on being ourselves and learning how to create art over achieving this mystical idea of an art style. So I didn't talk about mine a whole lot. I talked about my obsession with Crollo and Phaeton from Hunter x Hunter, and me giving up on my art style and some of my like art inspirations, but I didn't actually kind of discuss the key components of how I like approach the creation of art to actually get a final product. So if you guys would want a video where I actually discuss how I approach my coloring decisions and my sketching process a little bit more, and I actually kind of break it down in my thought process behind it, if assuming I'm thinking. I enter flow state a lot, so I don't think a lot either. But if you actually want to like hear my thoughts as I actually work through a piece, let me know. I will try to get it done. My family is going to be home a lot more for the summer, so they're not going to shut up. long enough for me to actually talk a whole lot, but I would be happy to break down my process a little bit more, especially skin rendering, because I think it is a little bit uglier how I do it, but I always really like the final product. So if that's something that interests you guys, let me know down below. One last thing before I provide my outro, please do not utilize social media as like a measuring stick for your success. Is measuring stick I want to use like a unit of success? Don't look at artists who are creating and are very successful and feel behind. No matter how old you are, no matter how long you've been drawing compared to them, don't do it, because it's going to suck the joy out of creating art. And that is the last thing you want. You're not going to find your style if you hate creating. And if you hate creating, maybe you need to find another hobby. I know that sounds a little bit harsh and rude, but if you're not enjoying the process of creating art ever, if you don't feel the itch to create, the compulsion to create, I implore you to try another creative hobby and see if maybe that's more suited to you. I'm an illustrator, I draw, things like that. Maybe try crochet. Maybe try something that's a little bit less kind of you make it yourself and a little bit more like coloring. Like people love coloring on TikTok, I've heard. Or diamond painting. You know, you can be creative and have a creative hobby without creating something completely new. And if you hate the process of drawing and stuff, maybe try a different hobby and find a different form of creativity that works for you. There's no shame in that. You need to find what works for you and makes you happy, because that's what's the most important part in this entire process. Don't look at others and think, I'm never going to be as good as them, because you're not going to enjoy the process if you're constantly destroying yourself. And if you can enter a little psychological brain bubble where you just kind of like let yourself be happy in happy artland, it's going to help a lot, okay? Like, it really helps to be like, I'm good at art, I love my art, I'm progressing, and I'm getting better every single day. My every drawing is a step closer to where I want to be. And as long as you keep telling yourself those positive affirmations and stuff like that, and treating art as a journey, not kind of like the result, you're going to feel a lot better regardless of how your art is turning out in the moment, right? Every drawing you make is a step closer, right? So if you liked this video, be sure to like it. Dislike if you dislike. Comment your favorite artists, people who inspire you, advice for finding an art style that you personally really like or you took to heart, the ways that you like to learn. I'm very curious because I think everybody's journey is unique or very personal to them, and I would love to hear yours. I would be happy to talk more about mine sometime if you are interested. Once again, let me know. Subscribe if you would like to see more of my content, more of my art. Let me know if you have any videos that you would really like to see from me. And I suppose my last question is, I made an outro in Clipchamp. It's a free template, but do you like the little outro screen that will be appearing momentarily? If you do, let me know. If you want it gone, also let me know. But like, comment, share, subscribe, whatever you want to do. I will see you next week, Saturday at 9 PST. And with all of this being said, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, night, wherever you are, and bye-bye.